Hello and welcome to this video. Now, in this section, we are going to start writing some codes. But before we go deep into our microservices, we need to create a shared or helper library. Now, some people might call it helper library, some might call it shared library. Okay. For our own case, probably we are going to call it helper library. Now, this helper library, it's created because I already know what we need. So I decided to just move them out from the different services and place them in a helper library. Now, this helper library, once we add all the helpers, we are going to publish them to NPM using GitHub and GitHub Actions. So we are going to set up a GitHub Actions pipeline and then we publish our helper library to NPM. Now, why do we need this helper library? Like I said, I already know what we need, the different parts that needs to be moved out from the different services and moved to this helper library. Now, for the purposes of this course, why do we need this library? We need it for one reason and one reason only: to avoid duplicate codes across microservices. Now, because when I started preparing for this course, I just saw that there were a lot of parts that were duplicated. They were used like across all the microservices. So I decided, okay, it would make more sense to just move them out from those services and then move them to just a particular library that we can install in the service where we need them. Okay, so the reason why we need this helper library is to avoid duplicate codes across microservices. Now, this is just the reason for this particular project we are working on. In a real life situation, it could be maybe you want to create reusable components. It could be functions, it could be components, it could be interfaces, it could be different things that you could add to this library that could be used across microservices. Now, for our own case, this makes much sense because for all the microservices, we are using the same programming language. Okay, we are using the same stack. So we are using Node.js, JavaScript, TypeScript. So it makes more sense for us. But in a case where probably different stacks are used for, or different stack is used for the different microservices, then maybe it's something that will have to be taught. The developers will have to think about it before they decide on creating this helper library. But for our own case, we are using the same stack across the microservices. So in order to avoid having duplicate codes, now this doesn't apply only to the microservices, it also applies to the React front end. Okay, so there are some parts maybe we are going to add that will be used in the React front end. Okay, so this is just the reason why we need this helper library. Now, doing it or taking this approach has some challenges. Okay, when we talk about these challenges, it's something that the developers will need to decide if it's something they can live with, or they don't want to just go through it, and they can just decide, okay, we will just create or maybe use duplicate codes across the microservices. Okay, so one of the challenges with this approach that we are using is if you need to update the library, then you have to go through the process of updating, pushing, and running the pipeline. Yes, we are going to set up a GitHub Actions pipeline because we are going to host it using GitHub and publish with GitHub Actions. Okay, so if you need to make an update to a particular, maybe you want to add a new property to an interface or create a new function, then you will have to go through the process of updating the library and pushing the code and then running the pipeline. Okay, and then another challenge here is updating all services that requires the new version. Every time we update, we will have to increase the version number inside the package JSON file for the library, and then you have to update the all services that requires that new version. Say for example, you add a new property to an interface that is used across all the services. Now maybe the first version was version 0.01, and then you update, add a new property that is required in all services, and then you increase the version to 0.02. Once you push, you run the pipeline and everything is successful, for you to use that new property, you have to update all the services or the particular service that requires that new property. So you have to update, go to your package.json file, increase the version number, and then run npm install. Now for this, the best case scenario for updating will be that, okay, you are only updating one service. That is the best case scenario. But the worst case scenario is you have to update all the services. It could be time consuming, it could be frustrating that, okay, you have to increase the version number in each of the services, and then you run npm install, go through that process every time you update. But for the purposes of this course, I think it's something I can live with. What we are going to do is add everything that I think we need. But as we go on, if maybe something happens that, okay, we need to add a new property to the library, or we need to move a function to the library, then all we just need to do is update it and then increase the version number wherever we need to use that new version. So these are the two challenges that we will likely face using this particular approach. Now, lastly, let's talk about the helpers that we are going to create. Like I said earlier, I already know what we need because while I was preparing for the course, I saw the different parts that need to be moved. Okay, so the first part that we are going to move or add to the helpers library are the interfaces. Now, for our backend, we are going to move all interfaces from the microservices and move them to this helpers function. So in our microservices, we are not going to have interfaces there. Everything will be added to these helper functions. All we just need to do is to import the interfaces. Okay, and then for the React front end, what we are going to do is we're only going to use the interfaces probably that is shared between the React front end and maybe one or two microservices. But the interfaces specific to the React application will be used only inside the components on the React front end. The reason for that is I discovered if we try to move the interface, all React interfaces to the library, then we will need to install React, we'll need to use probably the dispatch functions, and we don't need that on our backend. Okay, so we are going to move interfaces. Another helper is we are going to create our Cloudinary upload methods. So the method that will be used to upload images, because we are going to be using Cloudinary. So all the methods, the upload methods, we are going to add to the interfaces. Then our error handlers, we are going to add it to the interface. So once we add them, where we need them, we just import. Okay, and then we are going to create an API gateway middleware. Now remember, I said every request that will come from the API gateway will contain a token. That token will contain a value that the microservice will check if it contains a particular value that it requires, or for the microservices to check if the request is actually coming from the API gateway. If the request is not coming from the API gateway, we are going to reject that request. But if it's coming from the API gateway, the microservice will accept the request and allow the request to go through. So we create an API gateway middleware. Then our logger methods. Okay, so remember I said we are going to send all our logs to Elasticsearch and display them on Kibana. So we create a logger method. I will show you, we are going to use a library, and then all we need to do is just import the method, pass the required parameters, and then every log will error logs or maybe warnings, we will just send them to Elasticsearch and then display them on Kibana. And then lastly, we'll just create some helper functions, maybe like maybe a method to convert to uppercase or to convert to lowercase. We'll just create some helper methods. Okay, so these are the helpers that we are going to add into our library.